Hi, everyone. Hi. How many of you are a little sad because you feel like you're missing a product strategy talk at the same time that you're here for this talk? I have good news. This is the product strategy talk because culture, as we all know, you can have the best product strategy in the world. If you're not looking after your culture, then it doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. So welcome to the culture and product strategy talk. Okay. So to start off this talk, I just want to ask all of you guys a question. You'll probably know the answer, but I'm going to ask it nonetheless. What differentiates the companies on the left from the companies on the right? Is it? I'll give you multiple choice. Is it fast growth? Okay. Is it a great technology? Is it innovative business model? Okay, so how many of you guys, so if those companies all have that, right? This is what we talk about all the time in product strategy. Fast growth, innovative business model, better technology. Yes, all 6 of these companies have that, yes? All right, how many of you guys want to be like these companies? All right, how many of you guys want to be like these companies? All right, why?
Culture.
Yes.
2 of those 3 are disasters.
2 of these 3 are disasters. And the third? Yes, looks like it's heading in that direction. What actually differentiates these 2 groups is a focus on culture. That the companies that you guys all wanted to be like had a founder and had a team that was focused on culture from day one. Mark Benioff, in an executive offsite that I was at, said culture is the only competitive advantage. And so a little bit of an introduction to myself. I'm currently the Chief Product Officer of Nextdoor. How many of you guys are members? Members of Nextdoor? If you are not, you are missing out on so much. And before that, I was doing this kind of stuff and speaking, and that's why I even have this talk. And before that, I was at Amazon as the director of product for a new team that was building a new product. And before that, I was at Salesforce. We built the IoT cloud, led the Lightning Experience redesign. And before that, I was at IDEO. So long history of building digital platforms. So this is a quote that Mark actually said when I was in the room in an executive offsite. So he's real about it, right? This is not PR. This is not, Mark is famous for PR. This was not a piece of PR. This is something that he tells his executive team again and again and again. Meg Whitman, talked to her a little while ago. She said, earlier in my career, I thought that culture was a really important thing. And now I think it might be the only thing, right? How many of you guys are surprised that Meg Whitman would say that? Yeah, really surprising. She said that. Okay, so not only are CEOs, great CEOs, paying attention to the importance of culture, but so are investors, yes? How many of you guys have been through an IPO or are gearing up to go through an IPO? Yeah? Important to understand what investors value. More and more investors are valuing intangibles such as corporate culture, are driving a greater share of corporate value. BlackRock agrees. They have told and given guidance to their boards that they are going to be holding the boards accountable for the oversight of corporate culture. So culture, increasingly, if you are not having that conversation as the CPO with your CEO, you should start having that conversation. All right, so good culture, bad culture. Some people, back to the original slide, say to me, oh, but Amazon, I heard they have a terrible culture. It's not about good culture or bad culture, right? It's, I want to take that language kind of off the table as we go through this workshop. Because it is the culture that will be your competitive advantage for your company, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Something that might be good, a good culture for one person might be a terrible culture for another person. I worked a lot with Ray Dalio, Bridgewater, right? Good culture, bad culture, it really depends on who you are, right? So let's take that vernacular out of our vocabulary and really talk about effective culture. What is it that your company wants to achieve? What's the culture that you desire to get you there? And how do we actually align and create the processes and the mechanisms to get our culture there? All right. So effective culture is the foundation to ensure that your company achieves its goals. effective culture, not good culture or bad culture. Culture is the operating system of the company, right? Shortly after the IPO, Katrina Lake and her head of HR did a talk and talked about that. Culture is not. How many of you guys talk about, oh, this company has such a great culture. There are slides in the office and lunch every day, right? Oh my God, Google has completely broken our idea of corporate culture, right? Because it's all about whether people have free food and free lunch and massages and, kombucha on tap. That is not what we're talking about here, right? Those are company perks. That is not culture, right? So let's divorce and really identify what are perks and what's culture. All right, so what is culture? I'm a cultural anthropologist. I have a PhD in anthropology, funded by the National Science Foundation. So your tax dollars are at work. This is the border. True, you did fund my PhD, thank you. This is the border between Siberia and Mongolia. It is a land border. I've crossed the border twice by myself. Very interesting thing happens at this border. At the first checkpoint, you're leaving Russia. I was born in the Soviet Union. You're leaving Russia. And the first checkpoint, everybody lines up to get their passport stamped. And it's a very orderly line. There's only 2 windows open. Everybody's there, you walk in, it's silent, everybody's standing there. You go in, open up your passport, the little old lady looks at you, stamps your passport, you go on your way, okay? A couple of yards down the road, there's another checkpoint, the Mongolian checkpoint. You open the door, it's mayhem. It's like people are pushing and screaming and yelling, and there are 3 windows open, and it's like, there's just like a mob, right? There's like mob mentality. It's craziness. And the throughput is very, very slow, right? It's like just really nuts. So by definition, these are the same people. You can't actually be at the Mongolian checkpoint if you've not walked through the Russian checkpoint. Okay, you got it? Like they're the same people. They're exactly the same people. So what's happened? What's happened? The culture changed. The cultural context changed, and people changed their behaviors as a result. Culture is not about, everybody's like, oh, it's all about the people you hire. A little bit. But it's really more about the cultural context that you set as a leader in your organization. Okay, another example. This is the, has anybody been over this bridge? Yes, so. Okay, you guys have been over the bridge. Okay, so the bridge between Malaysia and Singapore. So how do people drive in Singapore? Go ahead.
Very orderly.
Okay, and then you cross the bridge, and you're in Malaysia, and what happens?
Scooters everywhere.
Okay, but how do people, the same people, how do they drive?
Crazy.
Crazy. So again, you see this happening everywhere, all over the world. As soon as the cultural context changes, people change their behavior. Okay, this is what I'm telling you. You think it's about, oh, this person came in, they're a bad apple. It's not so much bad apples. Every once in a while there is. There are people who can't adapt to new cultural contexts. That is true, right? But more likely than not, what's happening is the cultural context that is being created is creating the results and the behaviors that have been put in place by the leadership. Okay, so this is really, really important. Context matters more than people. Cultural context matters a lot, a lot. Okay, so what is culture? Culture is the structures that create the conditions for how people think and behave and what your organization can achieve. Okay, it's the structure, it's the conditions that you create that create the structure that actually then engenders and brings out certain behaviors of people, and then those behaviors is by definition what your organization can create, what it can achieve. Make sense? Anybody have doubts on this? Anybody want to leave? Anybody's like, I'm out of here? Okay. So healthy organizations actively measure and manage 5 culture risks. So this is the first thing that we're going to kind of start to address and learn about and start to workshop. So there's 5 culture risks that I'm going to talk about. The first one is scaling risk. when we talk to our investors, we're like, our growth up and to the right? Just like smooth line, up and to the right. But in fact, when you kind of look at how companies scale, it looks more like this. So there's a group of Stanford professors. Bob Sutton is one of them. He wrote Scaling Up Excellence, very good book. And if you think about the way that organizations scale, they actually scale through these inflection points. And these inflection points are fairly consistent. The first one is around 40 people. That's the point at which the CEO can no longer manage personally everybody. Right? They can't like stand up in a room and be like, hey, Joanne, I know you're good at this. I've got this need, right? So that's the first time when people actually need to kind of professionalize, right? And that's a big cultural inflection point. The next one is at around 150 people, right? This is close to Dunbar's number, right? Where you, again, those personal relationships start to break down. And you need to start to actually create real roles, functions, responsibilities, those types of things. And then you get to around 500 to kind of 800, 900 people, where again, you're kind of looking at an enterprise level kind of organizational structure and culture. And at each one of those inflection points, you actually have to rethink your cultural model. You have to actually design ahead, slightly ahead of the inflection point, or else you'll keep hiring and creating the behaviors that you will soon grow out of. And then, as you can see, what you don't want to do is you don't want to like go down for a long time while you try to climb your way back up, right? You want to kind of smooth out these inflection points by planning ahead for the next organizational cultural model, right? The next structure that you're going to get to, right? So most CEOs can pretty accurately predict how big they will be in a couple of months or in about a year or so. And so they need to actually actively start to plan that new organizational culture, as opposed to try to hold on to the culture that they had before. Okay. The next one is fragmentation risk. This one is, I think, best demonstrated by the episode of Silicon Valley where they, had the guys who are coding and then they bring in the salespeople and they're like, anybody know what I'm talking about? Two completely different cultures, right? So fragmentation risk often happens when you have a new function come in, you build a sales team alongside an engineering team, or in times of mergers and acquisitions, right? If you have two small companies merge, or two even big companies merge, you'll have this fragmentation risk, and it often takes a lot of energy out of the organization. Again, it makes the organization achieve less than what you originally had planned in your synergies because you weren't actually managing out the cultural model, right, to get you to an actually effective culture and a structure that works for both organizations. So the question is, do we have one kind of subsuming, does one culture subsume the other, and how do we actually work our way through that? Or do we spend a lot of time trying to figure out something in the middle? I would not recommend the something in the middle. I've seen that a lot, and it's really hard. It's much better if just one subsumes the other and you just deal with the fallout, rip off a Band-Aid, and move on. But that's after seeing quite a few situations of M&As. Like I think it's really important to figure out how that happens, right? Okay, attrition risk. So all companies experience attrition. Attrition is not a bad thing. As remember scaling risk, how companies scale, it's really good to actually have attrition from people who will not adapt to the new organizational model, especially when we as leaders have identified those people, understand that that adaptation is going to be hard, and that attrition happens. What you don't want to do is you don't want to get into a drip, drip, drip and try to hold on to people and be playing defense, right, all the time in terms of attrition risk. And then conformity risk. So conformity risk is the opposite side of sort of the diversity and inclusion conversation. And so because we want to really think about what it means to have conformity on our teams. So does this look like any company that you know? It can mean anything you want. There's squares and circles.
Most companies, I'd say, just men and women.
Okay, what other groups could it represent? Race, right? Right, diversity of, like the consumer base, right, in the United States, looks much more skewed toward other ethnicities other than Caucasians, and yet here we are, right, in terms of what most of our organizations look like. So what's the problem with this? What's the problem when most of our companies look this way?
It doesn't reflect our community.
It doesn't reflect our customer base, right? And so what kind of outcomes could we have? Right, we're designing things, assuming product market fit. Product market fit, as I think have a lot of us experienced, is determined by the people here, but the actual market is this, right? So in order to have better intuition, right, we really have to have decision makers in our organizations reflect our customer base. All right. And fortunately, there's a lot of data now that backs this up, since people have started looking for it. Nobody was looking for it for a long time, and now people have started. So this is a very, ultra-feminist and a left-wing organization called McKinsey & Company that has done a study. And what they found is, wow, look at that. Diversity by both ethnicity and gender create better financial results. What a shocking discovery, right? So, all right, next thing. So day to day, what are some of the things that we can do to affect and decrease our conformity risk on our teams? Okay, so all of us, how many of you guys are hiring managers, you hire people? Great, okay, so I'm gonna do a little exercise with you. So you're hiring a team of 2 people, and you can only hire 2. You've got 3 candidates. Does this sound familiar in any way to people? Yeah, okay. So you give people, you kind of determine the 10 qualifications represented by 10 questions that these candidates need to know in order to do a good job, in order to build a good product. You got candidate A, B, and C. Candidate A gets 8 out of 10 questions right. Candidate B gets 7 out of 10 right. Candidate C gets 5 out of 10 right. You've got 2 open slots. Who do you hire?
Clarifying question?
Yeah.
Which ones did they get right?
Okay. You guys are good. I need to change this up a little bit. All right. Okay, so the next question is, who's the most valuable candidate?
Depends
Okay.
what the spread is.
All right, so, all right, good. When I started doing this a year and a half ago, everybody was like, A and B. Okay, so, all right, so this is the answer. Okay, so who should you hire?
A, C.
Who's the most valuable candidate?
C.
Why?
Because they have the most unique strengths.
Anybody disagree? Anybody disagree that candidate C is the most valuable candidate?
What's the rest of the team look like?
Well, so you're hiring a team from scratch, and there's two open roles on the team.
But what are my skills?
Yeah.
You are the candidate B. You are like the B. But you have some very unique strengths as well. Just saying.
I would say if you're hiring a team, you want complementary skills so that they can complement each other, so that you're confident that they can get things done. And then if someone needs to grow in another area, they can still grow from that person that's there.
All right, right. Okay, let me kind of answer your question, or like build on your question. What if you have a team of all A's and B's? What's going to happen when you bring in candidate C?
Yeah.
Why?
Antibodies.
Why?
One of these things is not like the other.
But is that, I mean, what's actually the feedback you're going to get? Yeah.
They're going to be judged by the criteria of the A's and B's rather than by the C's.
Has anybody experienced this? Actually, yes. So tell us a story.
So when I joined Google, I felt this way a lot. I feel like my power set is around creativity and sort of generative ideas, and surrounded by a lot of people who even value that and who expect it to be back.
Let's go back to this chart. How many of our folks up here are engineers and financial people? Anybody? Okay. How many of our customers are engineers and financial people? So it's not just ethnicity and gender, right? It's like what you're talking about as well, right? When we don't have folks at this level, right, who really have empathy and know how to gain that empathy and have different sort of just mental backgrounds, like cognitive backgrounds, right? It's really hard to get candidacies integrated. So what else? We're going to so for your first sort of workshop assignment, I want you to turn to the person next to you, say hello. Hello. You guys work together. If there's three, you can work together. Make space for the three. And for the next 10 minutes, for the next 10 minutes, talk about what you will do as a leader to create the conditions for your candidacies to be successful. So let's share back. Who's got some ideas for how to make their the people that they're bringing in who are going to provide a new viewpoint to the team, how will we make them successful? Yes,
Well, here's something that Olivia does. Her team has this hiring hypothesis, and it's really just listening to it. And so we sort of talked about the value of coming back to that on a regular basis, because if you hire someone who has this hypothesis, they're going to have unique value in a special way. Why not check back in with them and just remind them, like, hey, we hired you because of these strengths. How are you doing? How are you feeling the culture? Anyway.
Talk about that, Olivia?
Well, we don't do the check-in part nearly as well. That was the improvement on it.
Okay.
But we do try and figure out what is that add, both skills and culture, and put people in a team that's looking for that. So it's something that they're already opting into and embracing. That set of spikes, strengths, and
That's awesome. So when they're creating an ad, just be really clear about what that ad is. But what if then they're perceived as not even having the basics by the team? Remember that 1, 2, what if they can't answer questions 1, 2, and 3? And everybody else thinks that's, yeah, go ahead.
I do have an opinion on that one.
Yes.
It is not hiring for the absence of weakness, it's hiring on strengths. So everything in the hypothesis is geared around what are the things that are amazing at.
Right.
What would be such a deal breaker that they couldn't work here and be a fit at all? So as long as we rule those out, it's not the absence of weakness.
Yeah, so we talk about that on our team too, like what are they spiky at? So if you're real super spiky at something, then you can be really weak on the other things, right? But you gotta be really spiky on something. Spiky. Yeah, you want to say something here.
No, I was just going to say, we encountered a really similar type of scenario, actually, in one of our latest hires. We found that just putting success criteria around their strengths that can be measured and made transparent to the rest of the team was really important. And it's really finding within just like the highlighting that's everything.
Great. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to double down on that too. We're a strength-based organization, so we know our strengths and everyone's understanding where they're spiky. And then having the teams be fully aware of where that curve is and where the gap is. Then even before we write the rep, even as we're like talking about, hey, we need another leader here, we need another head here, we look at our organization and say, hey, we seem to be short people who are doers. We have a lot of strategists, or we have a lot of the others. So just getting that buy-in before you even write the rec, and then of course having that be criteria as you're interviewing, knowing that there's filling a specific place, seems to make the process a little bit more palatable for folks.
Yeah.
So we take it at the higher level, and as a company, we always talk about the culture add, culture fit. So it starts before the interviewing process for anybody before you open the rec. And always when we discuss the feedback on a candidate in the room, everyone always reminds each other that we are trying to bring a different perspective in. And so it's culturally acceptable. And then it doesn't matter which team this candidate comes in, you're there because you have an open growth mindset. And everyone is accepted.
How about post the hire? What do we do post the hire? Yeah.
Well, we were talking about the pull between teams wanting to have urgency and efficiency in their implementation versus teams who don't just go immediately to the hottest area of the heat map, but actually allow time and space for minority or counterpoint voices to actually consider and deliberate and understand those perspectives before leaping to a conclusion. So there's definitely sort of, a spectrum, and you don't want to burn your efficiency at the same time. If you go for efficiency so hard and you sort of depress and mute those minority voices, you're not going to get the value out of those candidacies.
Yeah.
So we also do the Strengths Finder exercise, and something that I found really powerful within the PM group was not only everyone doing the exercise personally, but then like mapping the org, like mapping the PM org with strengths against all the different strength areas. And I think the thing that did is, one, illustrated how like there was this big clustering of the team in the kind of strategy segment that was like learning oriented, all that kind of thing, which is kind of good, but also is like quite concentrated. And then there are a few people who were really spiking in other areas, and I think that helped with like reducing a sense of kind of alienation of like, I'm not like the others. It made it feel more like a strength, that they were bringing something different and unique that the team didn't otherwise have as much of a strength in, and then did an exercise around, well, how can each person in this group like leverage those superpowers in the broader team context to
Right.
make that explicit conversation.
What about promotions? Like, what do we do around promotion time and performance review time, right? So you've brought in the candidate C, you're like high-fiving, they've got 4 out of 10, other people have 8 out of 10 on the team. What do you do around promotion times? How do you have that conversation with your team? Yeah, what do you do? And then how do you have that conversation with the team?
So we have a really diverse set of product managers, and we judge them on their ability to build a team around them that accentuates their strengths. So we have some product managers who don't write specs, and they're expected to grow an engineering team around them, a design team around them that's okay.
Okay.
And we have other product managers who it's like the expectation is like super detailed. So the evaluation is like, how is your team performing? Now, your strengths may be in different areas and the teams may be very different, and that's okay. But if you can't build that team around you, that's a problem. And we don't really have a good remediation for that.
Interesting. So how do you build all 10 around you? As opposed to judging on whether you have the 4 or the 8.
Yeah, because you're a leader.
Okay. Interesting. That's awesome. Where do you work? Oh, interesting. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah, last comment.
A big one for us is when we do promotions, really taking the moment to explain the why behind them and tell a story behind it, and not let that moment go unacknowledged, especially when someone has a different background or something that others may not see them doing, because it's such a moment to inspire the whole team as possible.
Right. Awesome. So so I think a lot of us have been talking about the hiring piece, right, and the bringing them on onboarding, hiring and onboarding. Promotions, there's still a lack of real understanding around how we do promotions, right? Because that's where that pyramid starts to narrow very quickly, right? Because people who have the 8 are like, but I have 8. This other person has 4. You can't possibly promote them and not promote me. And we still don't have a good mental model of how we do that. Okay. Moving on. Stagnation risk. Companies that don't manage stagnation and continually have processes to innovate face stagnation risk. That's the last one. Okay. I'm going to skip the next one. So how do we manage these risks, right? And the job of the leader, and kind of, at Amazon is a big culture company, a big company that really emphasizes its culture with its leadership principles, which I'll talk a second about. The job of the leader is primarily to maintain the culture and to really look after the culture and build the structures around themselves, right, that will actually help people to achieve what the organization wants to achieve. And the way that we do this is we create 3 sets of anchors: principles, mechanisms, and behavior monitors. So I'll talk about each one of these and sort of how, when we align these across the different levels of the organization, that's how we actually manage these culture risks, right? Is these risks are always present, they're always pulling on the organization, trying to pull it apart. And if we actually consciously design the principles, the mechanisms, and the behavior monitors across the organization at all levels, that's how we keep our organization grounded. Okay, so I'm going to go into each one of these. Principles are the written down, clear and concise agreements that govern the culture. I think most of us, yes, all of our organizations have some set of values or principles. Sometimes what I like to say is the difference between values and principles overall is that values are like feel-good things, like, inclusive, right? But like principles are things that tell you actually how to do that and what good looks like. And how to accomplish that. They're more actionable. So Amazon, again, the 14 leadership principles guide everything from hiring to promotions to decision-making inside the company, and there are many mechanisms that are built around that in order to do that. I think we've all seen Netflix's culture deck, right? That really outlines what do we hope to achieve as a company, and how do we actually expect everyone here to achieve those things. And then Bridgewater, who's read Principles by Ray Dalio, a bunch of people, many principles, but overall a very clear understanding of what is the culture of that company and how is everyone expected to behave, right? And there are many mechanisms, including some very interesting apps that you can now download that help you kind of actualize and bring those principles to life if you work at Bridgewater or beyond. So the next thing is behaviors. So principles don't mean anything if you don't do and role model the things that actually bring the culture to life. And we have to have behavior monitors at all levels of the organization, right? I think we can agree, given the events of the last 3 years or so, that CEOs need just as many, if not more, behavior monitors as anyone else. So we really have to make sure that across the entire organization, people's behaviors are being accounted for, and that they're being held accountable. So, does anybody know this story? Paula Deen. So did anybody work at Scripps when this happened? Okay. So TV Food Channel was owned by a media network based in Kentucky. One of the principles of the company was diversity, inclusion, and they were really dedicated to that. Paula Deen made a fairly bad comment, a fairly racist comment. They had a meeting, the executive team had a meeting, and in that meeting, very quickly, they decided to fire her. She was their biggest asset, right? She was their highest rated TV show at the time. And so she, in a tearful set of interviews, was like, I would not have fired me. I was so valuable to the company. And then talking to the co-founder of Scripps, she said the decision was easy because our principles and our behavior monitors were clear. And the decision was easy. And she knew that she did the right decision. The employees felt awesome about the decision. And they were able, the whole company just rallied around and created new programming and new concepts and ideas that actually, it didn't matter, right? They lost their biggest asset, but they did the right thing. And, it was the right thing to do. So.
Do you know if it affected viewership at all?
For the short term, yes, but over the long term, again, it was so motivating for the company that the company achieved, even greater success. And the other side is what is the counterfactual, right? What would have happened if they had not lived up to their principles, and what is the demoralization that would have happened, right? So, all right, okay, so anybody know this story? All right, so the Uber board of directors was shocked in 2017 about what was going on. But take a look at the date on this byline. Wow. Okay, so again, this is why investors now, shareholders, are holding companies more, and boards of directors more and more. Who here is a CEO? All right, so take note. Don't do bad stuff, right? And you will be found out probably, it may not be fair, but you probably missed the good old days of being a tech CEO and being able to probably do anything you want. Okay. And then finally, mechanisms. And this is probably the most important thing that we need to design within our organizations. These are the self-reinforcing system, tools, and institutions that don't make the culture rely on good intentions. So all of us can put out value statements and principles, and everybody is like, yes, we all intend to do this. And then you go back to your own job and you kind of just get into the day-to-day sort of stuff, and you might have the best intentions possible, but the mechanisms that you company has actually don't reinforce those principles or those value statements. So the best example of this, which I learned when I was at Amazon, is the and-on cord. So when Toyota wanted to create a culture of quality, what they did not do is send out an email Dear employees, dear factory managers, we now have a culture of quality as our #1 value. And therefore, we all intend you to make sure you focus on quality. Thank you very much, right? Has anybody gotten an email like that? I think a lot of us have gotten an email like that. No, what they did was they put in an and-on cord. How does an and-on cord work? You pull it. What does it do? Stops the line. How much does that cost? A lot. It costs a lot to stop the line. All right, so what people always ask me is, and what does that communicate to people? Quality is really, really important because you are encouraged to stop the line if you see a quality defect or if you think you see a quality defect. So what happens? Everybody gathers around. There are two possibilities. One, there was a quality defect. Is the person who pulled the and-on cord rewarded if there is a quality defect? Yes. Option 2, there was no quality defect. The employee is wrong. Is the employee rewarded for pulling the and-on cord? Why? Okay, so what's the upside to the business? So they use that really as a training moment, right? Of like, what is quality? Because either option, right, actually is about quality. Because if it is a quality defect, you pull the and-on cord, you actually get better quality. If it's not a quality defect, you pull the and-on cord, you talk with the whole, organization about what is quality. Either way, you reinforce quality. Either way. Right? And these are the types of self-reinforcing mechanisms that we hope to create when we really value something. All right, I'm going to skip over. So this is Intuit. Anybody here from Intuit? Intuit's True North dashboard? Okay. If Jimena's here, you can talk to her about this later. So what they had, their kind of philosophy on their values is we're basically a people business. If our employees happy, they will better serve customers. If our customers are happy, our shareholders will be just fine. That's how to read their metrics dashboard. Okay, so how many of our companies say customer obsession or customer centricity is our #1 value? Nobody says that. Nobody says that. No, for real, how many people say that? Okay, a lot of companies, okay. If you are a CEO, or especially if you're a chief product officer, how much time do you spend actually with customers in their locations without an agenda? Without an agenda. You're not trying to sell something. You're not trying to get feedback on a feature. You're just spending time with your customers. You're just trying to understand what's important to them. Yes? What do you mean? Yes, I do it. How much? Oh, not enough. But how much?
Like once a quarter.
Once a quarter. Yes.
Every week.
Every week. How much time?
A few hours.
Okay. Without an agenda. You're not trying to sell anything. You're not trying to get feature feedback. Awesome. So as a chief product officer at Nextdoor, I couldn't take the pictures in their homes, but I spend at least 2 days a month with our members in their neighborhoods, in their homes, around the country and around the world. Because we say we are customer obsessed, and there is nothing more important. There is no internal meeting that is more important. There is no internal discussion that is more important. If we say that this is important, it's important, right? So again, really thinking about what do we say, and then what are the mechanisms that we put in place, the things that we do. And my EA, she was like, Tatyana, you don't have member meetings in September. True story. And I'm like, but I'm going to be one of our set of customers is advertisers. So I'm spending 2 weeks next week with our advertisers at Adweek, just again, kind of listening to them, opening up, just sort of understanding what they're doing, right? Because just trying to figure out, so my commitment, my mechanism is 2 days a month. And I make sure 2 days a month, my EA is also on point to hold me accountable to that 2 days a month. And when there isn't 2 days a month scheduled on my calendar, she flags it to me, right?
What do you mean, no agenda? I mean, I'm sure you have a set of questions that you're coming in there.
Well, the questions are what does neighborhood mean to you? What are you interested in? How do you connect with your neighbors? Basically in their homes, thinking about like what is it that they're hoping to accomplish, right, in their neighborhoods, with their neighbors? What's the point of, like we say we're really around neighborhood communities, what does that really mean to them, right, without necessarily like jumping into our app, right?
So this is pre-arranged, like with just individual consumers?
Yes.
In their home?
Yes, in their homes. All right, so when you manage these, again, across, when you put principles, mechanisms, behavior monitors in place across the organization, you can manage culture risks really well. Ray Dalio, nothing is more important or more difficult than to get the culture and the people right. One might think that I had to get the economics and investment right, but to do that, I needed to get the people and the culture right first, right? So the biggest investment firm in the world, get the people and the culture right first, and then you can achieve those great results. Okay, so select one value or principle in your organization. And so you think about a value or a principle, something that you have in some deck somewhere, maybe in a plaque somewhere in your office for bigger companies. And you're going to design a mechanism to bring this principle to life on your team that you can implement next week. Not something that you hope somebody else will do, not something that you're going to delegate somebody to do, but something that you can do to actually say, like, we talk about quality, so I'm going to do this next week, or I'm going to implement this for my team next week. Or we say we're about customers or customer obsession, so I'm going to start doing this next week, okay? All right. Okay, you share it with us?
It's super important for us because we're distributed, and Slack is the means of communication, so one of the mechanisms that we institute it. I've already done it, so it's like no private channels.
No private channels.
So you can only create public channels, unless there is specific things like compensation, negotiation, and an offer. People should self-select. So if you don't want to be in the channel because it's not relevant, okay, you can go out, but anybody is invited to any channel.
That's great. Transparency, that's right. So how many of you guys have transparency as a value in your organization? And how many of you guys say everybody's calendars have to be completely open to everybody else? Right, okay. And how many of you guys say no private conversations, everything has to be public communication? Yeah. So if you're not doing those things, you should kind of rethink your transparency because those behaviors are not consistent, right? If you want to have a transparent culture. So that's awesome. Any others? Anybody else thought of a mechanism that they're, yeah?
Well, I did, and I realize it's very similar to what this one was, but, I do spend time with customers, but at less frequent intervals. Mm-hmm. But I have this thing for my team trying to help them build their user obsession and trying to give them metric being like the day a month type thing. Mm-hmm. And, but I don't do that.
Yeah, a mechanism is something that is there, right? That's repeatable. So that's why it's like the 2 days a month, right? Like some days it's 3 days a month, but it's like the mechanism just holds you accountable and makes it really visible to everybody.
Well, and for me, I thought I was doing well because I've had that for my team for quite some time.
Okay. Yeah.
But I wasn't doing it myself. And they keep not doing it. And I talking about it's not making it better, but if I do it, they really, like, all excuses are gone. The whole, if I can make time, they can make time.
Yeah. Anybody else? Want to chat? Want to share? No?
It's really easy, and I didn't know we had it for a long time. We have a public, within the company Slack channel where we post fan mail.
Fan mail?
Yeah. And it's not, we have kids who are fans, but I think every company, you have fans, and a lot of the salespeople are out there, the marketers are out there talking, but that seldom gets back to like the engineering teams and ops teams.
That's right.
But just being able to publish it, it's very low effort.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, our CEO, every Saturday, she sends an email with the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of member feedback. Every Saturday. She spends her Saturday morning, again, customer obsession. That's her mechanism to make sure that the company knows that she values it. She reads all of the reviews that are neighborhood operations, which is customer support, member support, all of the emails that they send to her. She goes through it. She sets aside her Saturday morning to go through all of that. And then she picks out and writes an email to the company. So that's her mechanism as well. All right, well, thank you very much for coming.